every time you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else.
Welcome to Women Who Make It, real conversations with women in the food and beverage industry who are building careers, leading teams, and figuring it all out. After years of building females in food, I've had conversations with some of the most brilliant women in the industry, and they shared the real stuff. The pivots, the boundaries, the burnouts, and the moments of, is this even working, before it finally clicked. So I hit record, and now you get to hear it too. We're Women Who Make It, so let's dig in.
Welcome back to Women Who Make It, the podcast where we share the real stories and perspectives behind the women shaping the future of the food and beverage industry. I'm your host, Angela Dodd, and today's conversation is about more than just leadership. It's about how the food system is evolving, how supply chain leaders are navigating rapid change, and what the future looks like from inside one of the world's largest food organizations. We're going to talk about scale, complexity, people leadership, and what's ahead, including how technology and AI are already reshaping the way work gets done. My guest today is Katie Holman, Vice President of Supply Chain at General Mills. And Katie is a people-focused global supply chain leader with more than 20 years of experience leading large teams, driving transformation across functions, and innovating across the entire value chain. She also brings a global perspective, which was shaped by 3 years leading the supply chain organization in Mumbai, India for General Mills. And today, she leads the end-to-end supply chain for the meals and baking operating unit within GMI. Now, in addition to her corporate leadership role, Katie is also the co-host of She Supply Chain podcast, where she creates space for honest conversations about careers, leadership, and growth within supply chain. Katie, welcome to Women Who Make It. I am so excited to have you here. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Me as well. Happy New Year. And I'm so excited. Thank you for asking me to join.
Happy New Year. This is the best way I can think to kick off the new year. And actually, like, the first thing I want to talk about, like, as we dig in and before we even think about going backwards and talking about the beginning of your career, like, let's start from the beginning and tell me, like, what about 2026 and beyond are you genuinely excited about right now? Like, about supply chain, the food system, or even what you're doing personally? I'm curious what has you excited right now?
Yeah. So I am one of those people. I love a new year. I think it's like opening a new notebook. It's like fresh start. Where do we want to go? We've had a lot of things, and I work at General Mills, and our calendar year and our fiscal year are separate. So I feel like I get like 2 new notebooks a year then, if that makes any sense. So when I think about 2026 right now, we have a really, from a supply chain standpoint, where I'm excited is there's a lot of things in flight right now. I think one of the things, I know everybody talks about AI, but what I get excited about is it's becoming more practical rather than just like theoretical. And so I get excited about like the possibilities there, but more than that, like I'm excited about like, it's easy to get excited about the tech, but more excited about the capabilities we're building with our teams and with our people, really going after things that maybe been around for a long time, but with the advancements that we've made, investments in things like our data systems and infrastructure, we're actually able to like build some capabilities that are actually fixing problems and really helping us think about things as a more like end-to-end supply chain rather than like these functional silos. So I'm super excited about that. And then, like I said, I just feel like I come into the new year usually with like a renewed sense of energy. I like to reflect on like what went well, what I want to take forward and what didn't, and what I'm going to let go of also as I go into the new year.
I love that. And double bonus, you're right. I didn't think of how that feeling of different fiscal and calendar years. You do get like double bonus, like pause and reflect times during the year.
I do. I get to do it January and June. Those are I'm like, I kind of like it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good moments. Everybody should be stopping and reflecting every 6 months anyways. Right. And so I love that you're kind of forced into it regardless.
Forced into it. Yeah.
Well, there sounds like there's a lot to be excited about as we head into 2026 from a supply chain perspective. And I'm really excited to like dig in and learn more around some of that specifically, because you touched on a few points that we're gonna fully expand on here a little bit more. Good. But let's rewind a bit. So our listeners know a little bit about you, but let's root them in. How did you initially get into F&B? What really drew you to supply chain? Because I don't know that many people coming out of high school who are like, yes, I want to be in supply chain.
Yeah,
Um,
I would say at that point, I didn't even know what supply chain was. So I went to college for engineering. So I studied chemical engineering and I did an internship in manufacturing. And to be honest, I think what I had in my head was like, it was, I don't know, like this assembly line of widgets that were just getting pumped out. And my first internship actually wasn't in food and beverage. It was in steel. It was at an Alcoa plant. They made these super alloy metal castings. And I fell in love with it. And the reason I did was it was this factory. It was in downtown Newport News in Virginia and filled with people from all walks of life. And for me, it was like this perfect blend of getting to work with people, which I think at the time I didn't realize was really important to me. And it was technical. So like you were solving problems, you were trying to fix things, getting the design right. And then you had to actually go and like make this thing and get to watch it from like the design part to like how they made the mold
so
to
cool.
actually pouring the hot steel and then eventually refining it so that it was good to go and that these parts were going to get used in like big, huge electrical turbines. Some of them went in space shuttles. Like, I mean, it was, to me, I thought that was so
So
cool.
cool.
So that's
Yeah.
how I started in supply chains and manufacturing. The next year, though, I interned with Anheuser-Busch. So they brew Budweiser and Bud Light. And when you're 21, that is just like the coolest thing I think you could ever dream of doing, right? And when
Free
I think
beer tastings every day.
right? Yeah, you did have
Quality
to take a
control.
breathalyzer every day before you left work. But it was, I mean, who doesn't love this? But you're making something that somebody's enjoying.
Yeah.
Right. And I just thought it was so cool. So when you're out at a bar or restaurant or you're in a grocery store, seeing something up on the shelf that somebody's going to buy and consume, like there's pride, I think,
So
in
much.
that. And so that was really, yeah, that's really how I found my way into supply chain. It was via manufacturing, which I still have a huge heart for manufacturing. And then later on in my career, I had a chance to expand beyond manufacturing. And I think that's where I realized how big supply chain was and how much it can impact the communities, the world around you. It's literally everywhere. So I had, like I said, the opportunity to work beyond manufacturing. That was really where my eyes were opened. And I had a chance to see this end-to-end view of our supply chain and what it can do.
There is, to your point, there is so much. Yeah, people say supply chain, and that means 100 different things,
It
right?
does.
And there can be 100 different roles.
Yep.
Within that, as you kind of went through, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of your early years at AB InBev, was there a specific moment that you're like, that you really fell in love with supply? Was there, that kind of defining moment of, oh gosh, yeah, I'm going to be doing this. Like, this is the track I'm going to be on.
I think the aha for me. So I loved manufacturing. I honestly thought my entire career was going to be in manufacturing. I loved it. I was very much happy, and that was the path I wanted to go down. And at the time, General Mills said, hey, we need to start developing these more like end-to-end supply chain leaders. So you traditionally came up through manufacturing or procurement, logistics. And I still remember the time my boss was like, we have this job for you. It's international. And I was like, ooh, tell me more. And he's like, it's in India. And I was like, I don't speak Hindi. How will I talk to people on the floor? And he was like, it's not a plant job. And I was like, what do you want me to go do? And this role, I'm actually embarrassed to say I didn't even know this role existed until they offered it to me. We have this massive, incredible supply chain team that sits in Mumbai, and they do everything from supply planning, demand planning, logistics. They do engineering, they do procurement operations, and a massive analytics team there too. And when I got this role and as I started to learn more, that's when I really feel like the aperture just opened for me. And I realized how cool was it to watch this go from figuring out how much you're going to forecast, like how much are people actually going to buy, figuring out the plan of how much raw materials you need to buy, then figuring out like, okay, well, how do we want to plan this? Where should we make it? Then the actual manufacturing part, which I was very familiar with. And I have to say, I thought was like the biggest and most important part. And then I realized there's so much more to the supply chain. And then you have to deliver it and getting it on shelf so that people can find it and enjoy it. That role for me is really where I was like, whoa, this is
This is
so
it.
much bigger than manufacturing plants. That was what all I'd known before. Yeah.
Yeah. That definitely takes an expansive leap,
Right?
right? And from a manufacturing side, gosh, there's so much there that I want to unpack. And because we're talking about Mumbai, I was going to bring this up later, but I would
Yeah.
love, like, let's fast forward a little bit because I want to talk a little bit about your leadership journey. And we're probably going to go back and forth between
It's
this
totally
timeline for
fine.
our
Yeah.
listeners, but that international experience, I think that global perspective, especially when you're stepping into a role that is so expansive for a company,
Yep.
and you were managing over 300 people,
Yeah.
325 individuals, right? And I'm curious, as you stepped out of Minnesota into
Yeah.
India and leading such a large team, like, what did that change about your leadership that could not have been learned if you stayed here domestically? Because we talk a lot about hybrid, right? You can
Yep.
manage an
Yep.
international team, yada yada. But like, how did that really transform your leadership? And what were some of the things that you've taken as you've come back into your
Yeah.
role here in Minnesota?
I think more than anything, I became comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And for like, not just professional, but like personally, our family, you move to a country that's not the one that you grew up in. You don't speak the language. And so you were constantly having to have like this growth mindset. Like you can't know everything. It's like impossible because you didn't grow up there. And I think that experience really helps you. Like you have to lean into curiosity. You have to lean into, again, having a growth mindset because you can't know it all. And I think seeking to understand, asking questions, that curiosity. And again, I think that place of like, I am very comfortable now being uncomfortable, if
Mm,
that makes any
yeah,
sense.
makes total sense.
And yeah, and I think, the empathy building too, then for what that must be like for when people, come to your home country too. There were just so many just like invaluable lessons there, like I said, for myself, for
Mm,
my family. But that thread was really the piece where like you had to get curious and get comfortable being
yeah.
uncomfortable. And by doing that, I think what it's led to today is I'm very comfortable with ambiguity, not knowing, saying I don't know something, and leaning in and asking questions. And like, okay, if you could figure out and navigate life there and lead this team there, you can kind of do it
Yeah.
anywhere. But again, I think you have to come in first with like this wanting to learn, this curious mindset.
I love that. And especially an important lesson coming into a time that we have a lot of ambiguity in the world
Mm,
today, right? And
yes.
we're
Yes.
all navigating so much change. As you stepped in and stepped out of that role, and your responsibilities, as you came back, got broader, your career expanded,
Yeah.
more complexity. I know one of the things you're known for is being able to set long-term strategy and still ensuring this execution actually happens. I have to assume some of this being okay with ambiguity and some of your leadership style all plays into this. But tell our listeners, like, how do you think about balancing vision with implementation and supply chain when things are constantly shifting? Because I think this is,
Yeah.
as a senior leader, I think, there's so much that you're managing at once and thinking about, but being that constant vision, but ensuring that implementation still happens. How do you balance that?
Yeah. So I think there's two things here. And I think one of them also definitely came from my experience in India is that context is so important.
Mm,
If people have context, I really believe like they will do the right thing. They will make the best decision for the business, but you have to have the context.
mm,
And that context has to come from, and that to me that's really what's going to enable this amazing, executional excellence, if you want to call it that. But it does start first with the vision and where are you headed? And that has to be grounded in the business outcome.
mm.
So anytime I start a new role, I figure out, and it doesn't really matter, I think, where you sit, like think about who your stakeholders
Yeah.
are. It could actually be directly with the business, it could be a consumer, but really think about who is it that you're trying to serve and like what outcome are they trying to drive and how do you and your team play a part in that, like where are they headed over the next 3 to 5 years and like what are the top things that like you and your team have got to help them deliver. And then I really try and share that honestly, like as much as I can, as often as I can, With my direct reports, I expect them to do it with their teams too. It's like you're really cascading this. And
Yeah.
to me, that is what's giving the context to people. If people understand the why and where we're headed, they're going to make the right choice, but you have to provide that context. So what I think is first, again, spend that time up front at the beginning, really trying to understand where is this business headed in the next 3 to 5 years and what is our role to play? What do they need from us? And then
Mm-hmm.
you can start to map out like, okay, then year one, year two, year three, like this is the map that we need to take. But you've got to build that with your team and make sure everybody understands that has the context because things will change. And I think being comfortable with that, there is always going to be flexibility in like how we get there. But if people understand the why, I think they can evolve their plans as those conditions change. Just like you said, things are constantly changing around us. That's okay. Do we still understand the why, where we're headed? And like
Mm-hmm.
people will make those right choices. Yeah.
I love that. It's so interesting because this is, when you hear something multiple times within a short period of time and it's
Yeah.
like it keeps echoing. So the one of the things I listened to somebody over the weekend who was talking about how important the why is, not just in leadership, yes, right? But like,
Mhm.
personally as well, I think. And the whole point to the conversation was how often we lose track of the why. We get so
Yeah.
stuck in the what and the how,
Hmm.
and that true leadership needs to be truly rooted in the why because we constantly
Yeah.
have to be coming back to it.
Yep.
And so it's so interesting that you just brought that up, as it's an echoing theme in my own life, as I was just in conversation about that this weekend, and something to think about. And as everybody's heading into 2026, like,
It is.
how are you going
Yeah.
to root yourself in your own why? Like, why
Yep.
am I showing up for this? Why, even when I think about community, why is community so important as we head into the future? Why are we doing this as a business? And because to your point, the what and the how can always
That
shift,
can
right?
flex, that can adapt, that can change. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that I wanted to ask you about,
Yeah.
as we think about your leadership, because for individuals who had the experience early in career being so close to manufacturing, we know, I know, and that like being in a manufacturing plant or close to manufacturing, it's a very different culture than maybe sitting in corporate, right? And it's a it's a different environment. Sometimes it's like a close-knit family, right? Like, what are some
Hmm.
of those lessons that you've taken early on from your manufacturing experiences that are truly carrying you through into your role now and into future roles?
I feel like I'm so lucky that I started in manufacturing because I do think at a very early age, you learn a lot of lessons that I still continue to carry with me today. Everything around people, accountability, building trust. When I think about, manufacturing plants, you want them to be reliable. Reliability is like the foundation of everything. And I really don't care where you work or what you do. If you can't be relied upon to deliver consistently, right? It's really hard to then make big transformational changes or to try and influence somebody else when like you're not kind of holding up your end of the bargain. And I remember a boss telling me, he's like, hey, our job is to deliver on safety, quality, and service, and then costs, right? And if we do all these things consistently, then we can go and ask for other things or try and get some other big things done. So I think that one was really important. And then from a people standpoint, there were just so many lessons. I think thinking about how you show up, this was one of my first bosses. Jim Bickline is his name. And he sat me down. You're like a brand new supervisor, right? And one of the things he kind of shared that was eye opening for me, and it's so simple, but it's so powerful, is that people are going to talk about you at the dinner table.
Mm,
And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, people are going to talk about it at the dinner table. And he said, I'm not sharing that with you because I want you to like try and be best friends with everybody. But how did you show up today? Were you fair? Did you try and help solve a problem? Did you try and remove barriers? Did you really seek to understand? Like, what would they say about you at the dinner table? And I think we could all relate to that, right? Where we've
yeah.
come home after maybe a hard
Yeah.
day, or you've come home after a great day. And I think helping me understand that impact that you can have on the team
Mm,
around you at a really early age. And it's just a really clear way to maybe reflect on like what would people say
yeah.
about you at the dinner table tonight when they get home from work. So I
Yeah.
loved that lesson.
Great early lesson
It was a
for,
great early
yeah.
lesson. I think a lot about how do you build trust and quickly. I think sometimes, not all plants I've worked in, but in quite a few, kind of like had to earn it, it wasn't just given.
Yeah.
And that came from showing up, that came from listening. It also came from like, how do you respond? Like when everything goes wrong, are you calm? Are you respectful? Do you jump into problem solving mode? Like those things all build trust like far
Mhm.
faster than, like trying to point blame and point fingers, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, not everybody gets it right, myself included, every time, but those moments over time, like to me, that's like what is building trust is how you show
Yeah.
up in those moments, how you engage with people, how do you make them feel, do they feel seen, heard, all of those things.
Those small things that you do every single day that
That
add
is
up,
what
and
compounds. It
it
does.
does.
And it goes one way or the other, but it can have this massive ripple effect if it's done well.
Yeah, because I feel like, to your point, when you show up in a plant setting, your corporate reputation doesn't always come with you into that setting, right? And
Yeah.
you do have to kind of like start from a blank sheet and build up that reputation and that trust with everybody in that environment. But I think that carries through, for any new role.
It
Um,
does.
and
Yes.
you might have a bit more of a corporate brand or reputation that you can lean on in some situations, in some roles, but with most teams you're starting from zero and building trust
You
and how you
are.
show up. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do. I think those early years helped ground me. And I think you coming back to those basics of like it's people, it's process, and it's trust.
Yeah, people, process, trust. I love that. A good alliteration to start. It's not so much alliteration, I guess that's not the right words, but
That's all right.
people, process, trust. It reminds me of like an MBA school, the 5 Ps. And
Oh yeah. Yeah.
well, okay, so let's pivot a little bit, and come out of, let's talk a little bit about AI and technology, because
Yeah.
when we think about how we're working and how things are changing so rapidly, we can't talk about the future without talking about technology
Yeah.
and how that will also shift some of our leadership. How has it already impacted? I guess two parts of the question. How is AI already changing the way your teams operate, whether that be forecasting, planning, decision making? I know earlier you touched on this a little bit. It's kind
Yeah.
of refining and allowing you to open up on some of those capabilities. Would love for you to expand on that. But then as a leader, the second part of this is there's also a tremendous amount of fear, right? And I think
Mm.
that this comes really into supply chain because people are like, our job's going to be replaced. How are you kind of navigating that with your teams so that there isn't a ton of fear and overwhelm when it comes to AI?
Yeah. And I think I can kind of answer both the questions together because I don't think you can, if you want something to really stick, right? You can't just do AI for the sake of I think one of the things that General Mills has done really well, specifically in our supply chain, is we are anchoring it in use cases, not like tools. So, where are those pain points today? Where is what we would call like the high friction work? So think about like you come in the morning and you have to pull like umpteen reports and filter it and clean it up before
Mm,
you can even like start to analyze it
do your
and
job.
really start to think through. And so to me, what I think has been different is as we've gone through this is again, we anchor it into like actual pain points, like where people need help. And I think that makes AI feel like it's helpful.
Mm,
It's not this like weird, abstract or threatening
yeah.
thing. So I think that helps a ton. And then I also think too, as we're designing it, again, you can't think of them as separate, like AI versus people. Like it's got to be
Mm,
what becomes possible when these
mm,
two are working together. And so where I look at, demand planning is one where we've cut the time in half for
mm.
our demand review cycle, which is huge. I mean,
Yeah.
because it wasn't just supply chain people. This was also our brand team, our marketing team, sales team. I mean, so many people were putting so many hours into getting these numbers like just right. And
Yeah.
we've been able to reduce that in half. And what happens is then instead of talking about like, okay, what went wrong? Now it's like, what would we like to go do?
Yeah.
Right. And so instead of arguing about the numbers or what drove this or what drove that, instead the conversation is shifted to, again, from being reactive to what would we like to go do now? Like, how do we want to shape this? What might this look like? And that feels That feels a
That
lot,
feels good.
a lot better. Like that feels a lot better.
Just having
I
that
think too,
expansive and white space of how do we want to spend our time, and let's
yes,
go
yes.
figure out how to
Um,
make more money, and yeah,
yeah, it does.
and
It
innovate.
like what kind of conversation should we go and have the customer about this? Or hey, have you seen this new, insight that we think is coming in off of social media? Your conversations are just feeling a lot different than they did even 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Um, I think, and we're again coming back to like these use cases and looking for these pain points. So the forecasting is one, how we manage waste, right? And
Mm,
so this is the food that we have produced that the demand maybe didn't come through for it like we thought it would. So what do we want to do with it? How do we mitigate that? It's been fun to see because even if you had all the time in the world, there's so much data out there. There's no way you would have that time to like crunch it and optimize it.
yeah.
And so having that at your fingertips to do that part for you, I think also like our team members get to feel good about solving some bigger problems that like they didn't even get a chance to get to before
Mm,
because it just would have taken so long to
yeah.
comb through just the enormous amount of data that was there.
That's
And
super
then
rewarding for teams.
yeah, it
Yeah, to like
is.
say we wrapped our hands around, we actually got this done in a year, and
Yes. And that feels good because it does free you up to do some bigger things. And I think, too, the other part that I really have appreciated is we're moving from this culture of trying to be, and this is hard because I think, especially in supply chain, you can have a lot of like A types who wanted the answers. And we're shifting from like this knowing culture to this learning culture
mm,
and being a lot more comfortable with experimentation and iterating, even as we build these capabilities. We're using like the agile method, which I know has been around
mm,
for years in the software industry. But, I would have said 5 or 6 years ago, if we built a new capability, we would have waited until it was perfect and then done this big reveal. And
mm.
instead, everyone's kind of rolling up their sleeves. And each week we iterate and we learn what worked, what didn't work. And then we adjust it and then we go forward and we try it again next week. And what's happening is it's progress over perfection. You're
Yeah,
also getting a lot more buy-in and you're getting a lot of like the end user's feedback more quickly too,
that's
rather than
great.
waiting for like the big reveal at the end.
Having a bunch of beta testers do,
Oh,
take,
yeah.
and then I feel like then you roll out something, a capability, and it's like then you're relearning it all. So being able to have more stakeholders
Mhm.
at the table and getting that feedback is huge.
There are I'm just like, why weren't we doing this sooner? There's so many good things that have come from this approach. Like so many good, just like you said, you get almost like a ton of change agents, if you will, rather than
Yeah.
just like one or two people. You get the real, like people will give you that feedback
Oh,
quickly.
yeah.
Right. And then you can iterate and make it better. And so rather than like you said, like there's this massive relearn of a new tool and then you find all these bugs and stuff like that. Instead, we're just making small progress each week.
I've certainly been a part of a lot of those transformations. And to your point, like they roll it out, there's frustrations that come out of all these different bugs
Yeah.
and changes, and you lose a lot of engagement from your broader teams in that way too. And I'm gonna pivot us here in a second, but because we're talking
Yeah.
about transformation, I'm so curious, like where do you think transformation breaks down most often in teams?
Yeah, this is such a good question. I really do feel like the transformation piece, and again, this has been eye-opening to me, this agile method, but like as I reflect, I think we do underestimate the change management. People were doing things a certain way for years because that's what
Mhm.
was working. And so I think you have to be mindful that if you come in and you want to shift and change everything, it can feel a little bit like you're up in your ivory tower and I know
Mm,
best, even though I'm not the one that actually has to do the work every day. And I think in the past, sometimes that's what would happen when we went to go roll out these new
yeah.
capabilities. And people do have to unlearn old behaviors, but I think understanding, well, why did they exist in the first place? And it was usually because they had to work around systems. They had time. Like people are doing these things for a reason. They're not doing it because they think they're special or they want to have their own way of working. They're doing it because they're trying to be effective and get the job done. And so as you come in with these new transformational tools, I think waiting until the end to bring them in, that's like such a mess. Like sometimes you'll have
Yeah.
like these steering committees, right?
Yeah.
And I just feel like if the accountability stops with the steering committee, like I'm like, it's never going to go anywhere. I
Yeah.
feel like that change sticks when, again, that end user, that frontline leader, they actually feel like this is theirs and it's not being done to them. Like they are truly a part of it. I say that, and I know that that means that it will probably take you longer. It will involve a lot more people. It will involve a lot more opinions.
Yeah.
And I think you end up with a better solution and longer term success by doing that. But I fully recognize it takes a lot more work and a
To
lot
get
more
there.
people and engagement to get there. Yeah.
I mean, that probably could even lean back into some of your manufacturing days, though, when you ask for some of your front end leaders, right,
Yeah.
to recognize problems and be a part of the solution and say, hey, I see a safety risk, right?
Yeah.
And you get them to have ownership in that way to make the whole situation better. But that leads, and I mean, the same principle, right? But bigger transformations
It
when we're
is.
talking
Yeah.
digital
No, it
transformations,
definitely
whatever.
is.
But I think the model holds.
I think it
Um,
does. It's interesting you say that. So we're on this safety journey in manufacturing, and traditionally it was always like get to zero, get to zero. And ideally, everybody would love
yeah.
to get to zero. But there's this piece that I think you have to recognize is like you're almost like waiting and assuming perfection then from everybody. And we know that our systems aren't designed perfectly. We know that people aren't perfect, right? And so
Mhm.
instead we almost like expect like there's going to be a near, what we call, like, hopefully we'll catch it as like a near miss. But to me, what's been the game changer about this is we call it work is done and not work is designed, but like work is actually done. And again, people don't come in with the intent of like, I'm going to take a shortcut and try and buck the system. I'm going to just do this my way because I'm some kind of cowboy. They come in and they do it that way because there's probably a dozen other priorities. There's 10 other things on their mind. They're trying to get all these things done. They're trying their best. And I think
Yeah.
when you start with that, and then you start to understand work is done. One of my favorite pictures they show is always like a perfectly manicured lawn with like walkways. And then like you can see the path where everybody cuts across because they're not going to go all the way to the center and then go.
A good visual. That is
It is. It's a
exactly
really
right.
good visual. And that is what like they're like, hey, I got to make it from point A to point B. And this is the best way for me to get there. And so with that mindset around safety, what we really try and look at is like, how have we designed our systems? Have we made it so that you have to like stand at this awkward angle to change a part or to clean something or to reach something? And taking that mindset, I think, then to AI and transformations and these new capabilities want to build, are we building them in a way that the end user would actually use them as designed, or would they use them a different way because we haven't really thought about what their day is actually like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So important. I think taking that, having that perspective and lens is going to be huge as you move forward into designing these capabilities. Because you're right, like the safety piece of it, you want to keep it as close to zero. But I think having that understanding that like people are showing up the best that they can. They're not coming to work saying I want to get hurt, right? And
No.
um,
Yeah.
so as we pivot, let's talk a little bit more from the personal side, and especially from your journey as a woman into senior leadership. I think one of the really tremendous things about General Mills is the number of women in leadership, number
Yeah.
one. So I like to preface this conversation for our listeners and that like the culture inside GMI may like it is highly inclusive. You guys do have great female representation and the culture is there to support, right? But
Yep.
for some of our listeners, right, who may
Yep.
not be in that environment or maybe in tougher seasons of life, let's talk a little bit about, you are in a very high pressure, high visibility role in leadership, and life doesn't always pause, right?
Mhm.
And as a woman, we all are finding that integration between home life, work life. How do you work to personally shift your energy from high intensity career and into home life, especially during seasons that may feel heavier or more challenging? I talk to a lot of women who are like, I'm handling a lot, right? I'm carrying
Yeah.
a lot. And I think individuals would really love to hear your perspective and how you have worked, or little tools maybe that they can implement, and how you shift your energy and think about that during harder seasons.
I love this question. I also love how it's framed up as energy. This is something that's actually shifted for me in the last couple of years. So from a personal standpoint, I did have like a very hard season, I would say 2024 into 2025. My husband was diagnosed with stage 3 colorectal cancer. And good news is he's in remission. He's in a really good spot now. But it was,
That's so
gosh,
hard.
over a year of like treatments and I'm super thankful we're here in the Twin Cities. He was going to Mayo Clinic, but it's close, but it's not that close.
Right. Still an
And
hour and a half drive.
yeah. And it was an aggressive cancer. It was an aggressive treatment. And he was young and they're like, we're going to do all these things. And, it all worked. But through that, right, like this was a lot going on at home. And just
Yeah.
like you said, there's always a lot going on at work. And I feel like this talk came in. Sometimes I think things come in right at the right moment. Again, we do have these amazing affinity networks at General Mills. And this was actually through our women's network. And it was a talk. And literally, I listened to this talk like the day that David was diagnosed, which is kind of crazy. But it was about your energy and how do you manage your energy.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found so interesting about this was the study that was done was actually trying to find the most productive people, like who got the most done. And what they found was the people who were the most productive actually managed their energy. And what the study shared was that energy is actually like you can replenish your energy. You can't replenish your time, but you can replenish your energy. And so if you come in at the beginning of the day and you just grind it out back to back, when you leave at the end of the day, you're at about 30% of your energy levels. And these people that they found who were highly, highly productive and got more done than anybody else, when they were leaving work, they were at like 80% of their energy levels. And yet they were getting more done than all these people who were grinding it out. And what they found was during the day, they took at least like it was like a 15-minute break. And it could be 3 5-minute breaks. It could be one 15-minute break. But they did something that filled their cup. And so that's going to look different for everybody. That could be meditation and breathing. That could be listening to some of your favorite music. That could be gabbing with a friend. That could be going for a walk. But whatever it is that just kind of fills you back up, but stepping away from that grind and doing that. And I was like, I'm going to try this. And it sounds so silly because it felt so hard to like say no, like, sorry, I have to, we're going to wrap this meeting up 5 minutes early because I'm really going to take this 5 minutes.
It's a hard thing in practice. You're like,
right?
Like
it is because you want to say yes. Yeah. You want to say yes to everything. And I think the other takeaway from this that I had was every time you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else. Yeah. So you're saying no to getting out of work on time. You're saying no to maybe you're going to catch up on the work that evening. You're saying no to being fully engaged in like your one-on-one conversations in the afternoon because you've been grinding it through. So like every time you say yes to something, you might not realize it, but at some point, like you're saying no because there's only so much time in a day, right?
Yep.
And I think that was the other part that I learned through that experience that I'm carrying with me is how do you shift and manage and your time, like your energy, and then getting clear. And I hope that people are listening. Like you don't need to have some massive life event to get clear on what your priorities are and where you can say no and where you want to be really intentional about where you spend your time and your energy. Yeah. I don't think you can get like a perfect balance. I think that's like this unrealistic expectation. And I think we all have different seasons, right? And different chapters. And I think just align with what's right for you is most important.
I think that's so wise. It's funny also. So many things that you're saying, like echoing in my personal life so my word for 2026 is intentionality. And
I like it.
Yeah. Have you chosen a word yet?
Okay. I can never choose one. So
I
have two. So one of my words is pause. And I'm trying to practice pausing before I say yes to everything. So I still have to practice this. And then my other word is abundance. I like that. That's been my word. Actually, I've had that the last couple of years and I just like it. So I'm keeping it.
I like it. And abundance. Well, it's actually so insightful because if you go forward with an abundance mindset, right, versus like scarcity, that changes how you take everything into your day, right, and how you respond to situations and how you think about business. So yeah, I love that. I love asking people what their words are.
So what's your intentionality? What are you going to do with this one?
A little bit the same. So like a lot of what you were talking about and whatever we say yes to, I think there's going to be a lot that comes into my world I think for 26, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity in 26.
Yeah.
And I think there's also going to be a lot of challenges, but looking at each of those with intention of where do I want to spend my time? How do I want to spend my energy? I love your trick of like recharging this energy through the day. I think that's
It
super, super
works. I'm
cool.
telling you, it works. And when I don't do
idea.
it, I can feel it. I
Yeah.
can feel it. And for me, I like a quick walk. Like that's all I need is a quick walk. And I feel pretty good. Yeah.
Recharges. So yeah, looking at intentionality and keeping that at the forefront of all things and conversations, because you're right, when you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so
Right?
yeah, that's 26 from my lens. But
I love it.
I could keep talking to you all day long. I don't want to miss the opportunity though to very quickly touch on the fact that you are also the co-host of She Supply Chain, and beyond your entire corporate responsibilities, you created this platform, and I want to know, what motivated you to do that, because it provides, right, this space to bring conversations forward, to bring people forward, and really curious, like, what motivated you? Because undertaking a podcast is no easy feat. And I know you guys are 1 year in celebrating this, but tell our listeners a little bit more about that journey.
Yeah, sure. So this has definitely been a passion project. So Courtney Anderson and myself, our co-hosts, we've been friends for a long, long time, and we both work in supply chain. That's how we met. And it's been one of those things that's kind of been on our hearts and minds, if you will, for a few years. And I think two things. One, we would be out and about. And again, I think General Mills is very special. We have so many incredible women in supply chain here. We're not quite at 50-50, but we're getting close. And we don't take that for granted. And as we're outside of that bubble, right? We hear a lot about like, it's just so hard to find women in supply chain. And Courtney was like, we're everywhere. You're just like not talking to us. And then the other part with this is we really hope that younger women, as they're listening to this, like if you see it, you can be it. And I think seeing and hearing these stories of all these incredible women. So every week we talk to a different woman in supply chain, as we talked about earlier. There's all kinds of parts of supply chain. So they come from all over. And just hearing their story and their journey, very similar to like Women Who Make It, and you're specifically the food and beverage industry. And I really hope that what people are walking away with is some lessons learned, something new and exciting, a different way to think about things or solve a problem. This has been one of those things that has been really energizing for us, because you're right. Like we both have very busy 9 to 5. We both have family, and it's been a cup filler though. So I think for now, we're going to keep on doing it, because again, it's been energizing for us. I mean, even these conversations like right now, like this will raise my energy for the rest of the day. So yeah, it's been wonderful. Yeah. I can't believe we've just hit a year here.
It's a huge accomplishment. And I'm a big advocate, as you know, for how do we create more spaces and more rooms for these conversations. And it's really funny that when you said people just don't know where to find them. I said that 6-7 years ago, when people are like, we want to hire more women, and I'm like, if this is the problem, right? Like we can come up with a solution because we exist, right? And so that was even with Females in Food. One of the things that spurred FIF forward was, I'm like, I can tell you where the women are at.
We're here.
Let's make sure we are visible, and that people can find us. And so I love what you're doing, and really encourage our listeners to go check out your podcast, She Supply Chain. But as we close up, where else can listeners find you beyond She Supply Chain? Where else can they learn, connect with you about your work?
Yeah. So She Supply Chains, you can go to our website. So shesupplychains.com. You can check out our podcast. We're on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, basically anywhere you get your podcast, you can find that. We're also on LinkedIn, Instagram. We're on TikTok too. This is new for us. I feel like Courtney and I are also trying to learn some new skills here from the young people. So yeah, reach out. And if you know anybody or anybody's listening and they want to be on the podcast, send us a note. We love meeting new women. And we're also now having male allies on too. So we started that this year, which has been really fun as well.
That's really fun.
Yeah.
I had a different thought that will take us down a different rabbit hole. So I'm going to save that for another conversation. There's so much here, but I think our listeners will definitely, for those listening, if you work in supply chain, be sure to reach out. Really, really fun to be able to follow them and connect with you. Katie, thank you so much for the thoughtful and forward-looking conversation. I'm truly inspired by you, but I also just really appreciate your warmth and candor and willingness to show up and share your perspectives and journeys. As you said, like having these spaces, these conversations, it not just fills my cup, but also for our listeners.
Yeah.
I know there's not enough of these conversations happening where they're accessible for women to be able to hear. And so I know I've had countless people reaching out to me saying, we just love being able to hear about more women's leadership journeys in the F&B industry, and specifically how you're leading through all the change and complexity in supply chain and the different seasons of life. So thank you so much. It's been such a fun conversation. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, we really hope that you'll like, comment, and share, because you never know who else will benefit from hearing it as well. Because we're not just making food, we're making moves. We're women who make it. See you next time.